Rotary cutter is a really useful tool designed for making cutting easier. They are primarily marketed at quilters, although a lot of garment sewers use them as well. They do come in multiple sizes, and they are what they look like. It's a giant razor blade on a wheel. You pull back the safety, and it exposes this absurdly sharp blade. Please do keep in mind that when I say sharp, I mean sharp. It can cut your hair, it can cut your skin, it can cut whatever it's up against because it's a razor blade on a wheel. The nice thing about it being a razor blade on a wheel is that it can cut a lot more thicknesses than you can with a pair of shears, particularly without hurting your hand to a large degree. They come in really 4 different sizes. These are the 2 middle sizes. There's a tiny little 18 millimeter that's smaller, and there's a giant 60 millimeter that's bigger, and this is the 28 millimeter and the 45 millimeter, which are really the most common sizes available and in use. I use my 45 millimeter primarily for quilting, the 28 millimeter primarily for garments. When I'm working on quilting, I use invariably my rotary cutter with a clear acrylic ruler on top of a self-healing cutting mat. The only real drawback to the rotary cutter, which can cut through, this particular size can cut through 16 layers of fabric at one time, which is such a huge time saver in quilting, but it has to be done on top of a self-healing mat. Fortunately, most of those mats are sold gridded, which means that you can use the grid in the mat along with the grid on an acrylic ruler to line everything up to get nice square cuts. If, for example, I'm working on a postage stamp quilt and I need 3,000 2.5-inch squares to make that quilt, it is much easier to cut out a stack of 16 fabrics in a big strip 2.5 inches long, and then break that strip into 2.5-inch squares times 16 in a double thickness, which is 32 per stack all the way across. Way easier to do it assembly line fashion like that than it would be to cut out 3,000 2.5-inch squares one at a time using a pair of shears. So, to do that, you would match up the grid in your ruler with the lines on your cutting mat, square that up with the grain line of your fabric, you pull back your safety, which I'm not going to do here, you push down with the rotary cutter and then out with your hand all the way across in order to make your cut. Remember to always put the safety back on when you're done. If, however, you're working with garments, a smaller rotary cutter might be what you prefer. For garment cutting, particularly with knits or slippery fabrics, a rotary cutter is such a huge benefit. I could cut out lots and lots of different fabrics in the same size with a bigger rotary cutter, but if you aren't manufacturing, that might not be useful for you. However, if you're cutting out a knit garment where the fabric wants to slide around a lot, you can tape that fabric down to your cutting surface on top of your self-healing mat and use a smaller rotary cutter to really get into curves and trace around the edges of your pattern to get a nice accurate cut. I resisted the rotary cutter for a long time because I thought, well, it's just for quilters. Rotary cutters are a huge benefit and in a lot of ways are better than shears depending on the job. Rotary cutter.